This panel is going to be about interoperability. We're here with Irene with LayerZero. Now, there are multiple different types of approaches to handle this issue. It's a major issue in blockchain infrastructure. The first question we have is, why is cross-chain interoperability important for Web3 to achieve its full potential?
Thank you so much for this question, and I'm so glad to be up here with the leader of Supra Oracles because they're also very involved in building out a secure and scalable infrastructure stack. It's interesting, this time last year, I was asked in Singapore, for example, in Paris, is the future of crypto multi-chain? And fast forward to today, nearly 2024, and it's so obvious that the present is multi-chain, and even beyond that, it's cross-chain and it's omni-chain. And we think of these three things actually somewhat distinctly. There are 50 maybe notable app chains that exist. Goon just before was talking about subnets. The optionality and ease with which application developers can launch their own L2s or rollups is as lightweight as ever before. So having a plethora of chains is the status quo now. Now, how do you abstract away that complexity? So for me, when I think about omni-chain and why interoperability and the standard that LayerZero has created is so imperative, I think about onboarding new users and developers. We often have these grand statements made on stage of when will the next 1 million people come into the space, but if you've spoken with your childhood best friend in a long time or your grandmother in a long time, you'll know that the expectation that people and developers have to know the difference between Ethereum and Solana and have 5 different gas tokens in their wallet is entirely sort of in our wildest dreams. And so if we all have this same shared thesis of there being meaningful penetration into Web2 technology, then abstracting away that complexity is incredibly important. And obviously also ensuring seamless and unified liquidity, which is right now the backbone for a lot of how blockchain technology is used, meaning the movement of value across chains. It then makes for the need for interoperability first and foremost.
Absolutely. The liquidity fragmentation, from my view, is the biggest issue. And also, composability of cross-chain assets is a major issue. So the next question is, we all know that bridges have been one of the weakest links. In fact, there's been, to my understanding, over 2 billion worth of hacks and vulnerabilities in the last few years. In your opinion, what are the core issues that need to be addressed to address these vulnerabilities?
Yeah, to set the scene for some people here who are less familiar with LayerZero, how this protocol came about was very much inspired by the flaws with previously status quo bridges. So if you move back to 2020 and 2021, when our 3 co-founders wanted to get together and build a game, they looked around at bridges that existed, and they wanted to build a game that involved assets on both Ethereum and BNB. It was really exciting that at the time Binance Smart Chain actually had garnered a meaningful ecosystem and shattered those expectations around there just being Ethereum and Ethereum only. When they looked at existing bridges, as developers and also as gamers themselves, they would have never used them to create that ideal end experience. Now, why was that? The status quo for bridges was wrapped asset bridges or smart contract bridges. And what that means is users would lock their value or their assets into smart contracts that are owned by other teams, often managed by opaque multi-sigs, and would be issued an IOU or a synthetic asset on the other side. That means you'd have a wrapped version of, say, USDC. And you're using these assets really just trusting that that storage smart contract, that bridge, won't get hacked. And now what we've seen over the last 2 years is bridges with that model often do get compromised. A notable example, unfortunately, was a bridge that was one of the very first in the space called Multichain. And earlier this year, when the multisig was compromised, entire ecosystems were shattered. A great example is the Phantom ecosystem. Nearly all of their stablecoin assets were wrapped versions through this bridge. And so I think wrapped assets are something that should be of the past. We've always believed that native assets are the way. And that was one thing that inspired the way we architected the LayerZero protocol. The other thing, too, is actually the major reason for all of the bridge hacks of 2022 was smart contract bugs. I think people often think it's because of some esoteric architectural flaw in the way that a bridge or messaging protocol is designed, but it's actually usually because of a developer or a developer team that meant well, wanted to upgrade their protocol and introduced some sort of flaw or didn't initialize something properly. And so the primary vectors of attack here that I am most concerned about and our team thinks about a lot is this piece of infrastructure immutable? If you're using it in your stack, is it something that you can actually trust, like a true protocol, or is it a service? And I can elaborate that on that in a little bit. And then the second thing is it issuing wrapped assets, or are you getting the real deal? Because end users should not be bearing that risk of something that doesn't have the true value of the asset they've purchased in perpetuity.
You know, there's a subtlety about the multi-sigs. I do want to say that most of the industry doesn't get right, especially on crypto Twitter. And that's that multi-sigs themselves are a vulnerability. Now, if you look at Ethereum, it's actually a huge multi-sig. It's BLS multi-sig. Most blockchains are actually multi-sigs. So the thing you got to look at, in my opinion, is how decentralized are those multi-sigs? How many participants are engaged that, you know, in the multi-chain hack, for example, I think that was like the founder CEO, like one person that controlled those keys. You want to decentralize those multi-sigs. You want to look at how many multi-sigs are involved to compromise. Moving forward here, you know, in cross-chain communication, what are the key points that are important for end consumers to consider when selecting a bridge?
It's so tough because the state that we're in right now in crypto is one where to get maximum transparency, you have to be technical, which I think is not the end state we want to be in. Like I said before, if we expect the next 10,000 people to enter the space, let alone, you know, the next million, it's very unrealistic to assume that ordinary people will have multiple tabs open to go onto Etherscan and to verify contracts themselves. And so I think education at this point in time and keeping it very like understandable and usable is really important. With LayerZero, the way we constructed the protocol was around these three design principles that were meant to be hyper cognizant of end user concerns and also just empathy for the people in the space who have experienced horrible exploits in the past. Your messaging infrastructure, your interoperability infrastructure should be entirely immutable, and it should be modular and decided upon by the application developers. So those three design principles are: one, immutability. All of the smart contracts that comprise the actual protocol should not be upgradable by LayerZero Labs. Two, permissionlessness. Anyone should be able to build with the infrastructure without permission from the LayerZero Labs team. And the validation layer, the mechanism through which messages are actually confirmed and ensured to not be malicious, have that be open and permissionless so it can be as decentralized as an application would like, or priced along this line of cost and security. And then the third part is censorship resistance. And this is actually a piece that I think should matter a lot more to end users. Are you using bridges or protocols where some other team can reorder the messages and extract more value? This is something that I haven't seen enough conversation around in terms of bridging. And for us, the ethos of our team was always one of, how can we build something that is actually like the internet? The internet is this tool that anyone can build something great with, can build something bad with. It should be free and open. And that underlying protocol called TCP/IP, which actually enables sharing of information, packets from one server to another, it should be parallel with the way we build LayerZero if it is something that's evergreen and used by application developers today and 100 years from now. So how can you build something that actually evolves with time?
You mentioned two things I want to touch upon. The fact that these bridges can actually be a hotspot for MEV, that maybe, unless the bridge has ordering built into it perhaps, that those bridge operators can do a couple things. There's three things I think they could do. Possibly order the bridge transaction in a certain manner, possibly delay the publishing or the transaction itself, and maybe they can get their trade in before they publish it cross-chain. And also censorship resistance is an issue because maybe they don't like it and they're like, we don't do this one. So I think decentralization really matters to handle those issues.
Thank you for bringing up those points. It's very thoughtful.
So kind of continuing on this theme of risk, So how does one understand the risks of cross-chain messaging? And you touched upon it, but what else can you kind of mention?
So one framework that I often talk through with developers as they're creating their infrastructure stack is, do you want to use a protocol or do you want to use a service? The way I define a service is something that requires the liveness of its creator company to maintain the integrity of the value that you're getting from it. What's an example? Credit cards, that's a service. You're relying on the integrity, the actual robustness. Companies that exist support people of the credit card company. What's an example of a protocol then? Well, a protocol should be immutable, it should be open, it should be usable by all, and it shouldn't need the developers that originally created it to be alive, to be responding to your Telegram messages, to have runway, venture funding. With LayerZero, the way we constructed it really was so if something horrible happened to our entire team, we just all disappeared. All 6,000 applications that have integrated it on mainnet right now can continue to do so in perpetuity. So that's one thing. But a key risk factor here is if it's a service, that also means that if this creator company were suddenly malicious and wanted to make changes, could that harm your protocol? Now, you asked about end users, and I think for end users, you're buying into smart contract risk every time you put your money into a DeFi protocol, for example. This is additional layers of risk on top of it, and I think that that's something for this state of crypto that we're in right now needs to be top of mind for a lot of teams. How are they selecting their infrastructure stack? If you have governance tokens, you should be active in the forums. And if they're selecting cross-chain messaging implementations to go cross-chain, you should have an opinion about this, because this will introduce potentially other vectors of risk for the protocols that you use. I think a few other things that come to mind are the security operations of these teams. It's not a very sexy topic, but do these teams actually have engineers that have storied amounts of experience on pager duty? I don't know how many developers we have in the audience here, but great teams that build great products typically are built by engineers who have a lot of reverence for good security operations practices. If you're pushing immutable code like we are, a lot can go wrong. So how many rounds of external audits are you commissioning? What does internal testing look like? For us, we create red and blue teams, and we try and attack and break the code before we ship it to auditors. We also have every single engineer on pager duty, and before we push something, we have to ask ourselves, is this the absolute best that it can be? And our CTO has this model, better is better, and that has been the gold standard for us before we ship any code.
You mentioned a word, framework, right, in evaluating different types of bridges. One thing that I found useful to look into these is to calculate and understand the number of independent agents, kind of a more of game theoretical perspective. How many independent agents have to collude to cause a problem? And also, I think it's very important to understand the other aspects, including speed. So security is number one, speed, and then also the gas costs, and also slippage. These are things that I think consumers really need to be aware of.
If I can just add on that a bit, one other framework to think through essentially what you just alluded to is modular versus monolithic security. So for some bridges that currently exist, when an application integrates it, they're buying into this fixed set or this fixed opinion for how security cross-chain should look. That means block confirmations are determined by the bridge operator. That means the validator set, or the set of parties, like you said, that would have to collude, are determined by the bridge operator. The slippage, gas costs, all of that. You're delegating your security to some other third-party team. On the modularity side, this means application developers should maintain the ability to configure all of this and be able to determine for themselves and change over time how these messages are validated. And so with LayerZero, we have these endpoints that are deployed on all the chains that we support. Those endpoints are the immutable smart contract libraries. Between the endpoints, however, is this open and permissionless layer that applications can determine themselves. So they could run one of these Oracle entities or validator entities themselves. They could use a ZK-like client. In addition to that, they could even slot in some bridge if they wanted to leverage their validation mechanism and create an X out of N arrangement there. Let's say a year later, they're securing $2 billion worth of value, and research has evolved. Now there's some other best practice for security, and they want to include this kind of validation mechanism within their validation layer. You can do that. It's open, permissionless. They can swap it in and out. So in this way, LayerZero evolves with time. Developers always have ownership over things like block confirmations, validation methodologies, and also which pathways are enabled, and their protocol can evolve with their own growth.
That is the kind of age-old kind of debate in the industry at large, modularity versus integration or vertical integration or monolithic designs. The only concern I have with modularity is that developers are not always security focused. Sometimes they're just focused on speed. It's like, you know what, let's go faster by having one less block confirmation. And the thing is, we can't expect all developers, and some of these guys are like, 17-year-old high school kids, right, to have this knowledge. So having too much choice could be a problem as well, and having experts set the parameters in a monolithic system might be safer, but I think choice is important. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, and time will tell, certainly. So now we're going to transition away from the kind of risk and daunting part and focus on the more interesting and exciting parts of cross-chain bridging. So what are some cross-chain applications you're excited about?
I was just speaking with a team off stage that's building in the gaming infrastructure space. I was a gamer growing up. I can't claim to be a pro gamer, but it was something that was really formative for my childhood. And I think what mattered a lot to me was that games were fun. And so when I'm at GDC or I'm speaking with game developers and they're thinking about how they can utilize multiple chains, I'm encouraging them to leverage what's possible and accessible to actually build something that's fun, not just some novel like gameplay mechanism. It should be, because it's introducing blockchain and that has 10x additional or new friction, it should be 10x more fun or provide 10x new value. There are games that are doing this really well. One title that's coming out this month that we've worked really closely with is called Shrapnel, and they have a vision that's far beyond just the Shrapnel title, but they've built a first-person shooter game that actually feels like the first-person shooter games I played growing up. I think another thing, too, with some of the game devs in this area of the world, in India, in Korea, in Japan, is they're quite avant-garde in thinking about different chains, almost like different programming languages. For me, as someone who studied computer science, when I was building fun applications, I wouldn't ask myself, oh, C++ is a great language. What can I build with C++? I would always start by thinking about, is there some problem I want to solve? Is there some experience I want to create? And now what are the tools I have at my disposal to achieve that dream state user experience? And if you look at different chains right now, built by different programming languages, look at ZK Sync, Polygon ZK VM, and then you also have Ethereum with all of its liquidity, and Solana for fast and quick settlement, chains that have really robust communities, so like a lot of consumers on there. I would look at them like different microservices or programming languages. And now with LayerZero, which is that transport layer underneath, you can leverage the best of all of these and abstract that all away for the end user. So I think gaming is where I want to see that. Users shouldn't know that they're touching 10 different chains. It should just feel like a fun game. I think two other areas I'm excited about. DeFi continues to be what gets me up in the morning. I think about it when I'm going to bed at night. I'm excited to see these V2 and V3 iterations of legacy protocols that are thinking about what part of the stack should be elegant and immutable, and where should cross-chain come into this, particularly for lending and borrowing protocols that want to enable lending on one chain and borrowing on a few others in one click without multiple gas tokens, and LayerZero will be a part of these really important projects. And then finally, enterprise and institutions. We thought we would just still be in this pure exploration phase in 2023. A few weeks ago, we announced that LayerZero is partnering with JP Morgan, Apollo, and Avalanche's Spruce subnet. Goon may have talked about this before, to enable the very first, for this consortium of institutions, value passing between permission chains. So now you have banks that have private chains and can securely pass value in a far quicker and far cheaper way between them.
I'm also really interested in cross-chain DeFi. Like, imagine if you're playing a game in some Avalanche subnet, perhaps, and you earn some NFT. And what if I could put that NFT up as collateral and borrow some ETH? and do something on Ethereum. So these are some really new applications that are coming down the pipeline. So in the proliferation of these, layer 1s, layer 2s, subnets, parachains, cosmos zones, et cetera, there will likely be hundreds of chains. I'm wondering if you have an opinion on if there will be a power law distribution on like the most popular ecosystems, and just your view on that, yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this. I think a year out, I was already, for example, super bullish on what the OP Labs team would be doing with Superchain. We have been working with Avalanche on their subnet since day one, and now we see teams like Polygon have CDK, Arbitrum have Orbit, CK Stink has their whole stack, and then you also have Caldera, Conduit, AltLayer, all these teams making it easy to spin up rollups and app chains. So there is a chance that we will end up in a world where there are thousands of them. Now, the reason why that I actually think this will end up settling down to maybe more like 100 app chains rather than thousands is because there is a cost to running these, and like that capital has to be generated somehow, maybe fundraised through venture capital, maybe teams can come up with some sort of sustainable revenue model, but you need users and you need activity on your chain to sustain these costs. And I don't think that with the timing of the market and also with the current burdens of running your own chain, it will just like converge in a way where there are thousands of them. So yes, I do think that it will settle down to a more popular 100, maybe even less. And the interoperability between them will be absolutely essential in ensuring that there is liquidity for actual usage on these.
Right. Yeah, I'm personally kind of the view there are probably maybe like 20 mega chains and then a bunch of app chains. That's just my point of view, largely for a lot of the reasons you said. Since we're kind of getting to the end of this panel, I would love to hear from you any new product ideas or sneak peeks that you're allowed to share that your organization is working on.
There are so many things that I wish I could share or announce at IBW. It just so happens that with the timing I can't. But a lot of what will be coming out shortly is informed by the user research and feedback we've gotten from developers over the last 18 months since we went live. One thing that came out a few weeks ago that I think is just like the tip of the iceberg and is a response to a lot of that feedback was LayerZero Scan v2. So when we launched LayerZero Scan about a year and a half ago, it was the first omni-chain block explorer. And the point of that is not to compete with other block explorers, but rather to just make it easier for developers to test and track transactions cross-chain. But then it turned out that a lot of people just use it for general block explorer needs, and even some white hat sleuthers use that as their primary tool for this. And so the new version has really advanced analytics, and there will be more utility that's built into it in the coming weeks. I think, I really want to tease some things, but what I'll say is if you're a builder and you are thinking about interoperability or you've been using LayerZero ecosystem projects, the next few weeks will be incredibly exciting.
That's really awesome. For us at Supra, one really new piece of information that's not widely publicized yet is we've been able to formally verify our moonshot consensus algorithm. And other than Tendermint, to our knowledge, we're the only ones that have passed the Ivy checker. This is really hard to do. And we are also able to, we hit some interesting milestones with this consensus algorithm. We're producing blocks on the order of 180 milliseconds. We're able to finalize them in under 800 milliseconds. We think that this is going to make Supra the fastest Oracle possible. So we're very excited about that, more news on that. So Irene, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, and congratulations to your team as well.
Thank you.